Happy Halloween! We are officially at the mid-season mark. Today we have our Week 9 power rankings, betting tips even, something new here on the channel. Stay tuned for all of it. We're going to cover it here in a moment. So we're going to kick it off here with something different. Of course, Amir and I, outside of the podcast, we are avid gamblers. So this is not gambling advice, but what we wanted to do, we wanted to use a twist on the Halloween, trick or treat. We wanted to look at the game lines and spreads ahead of this weekend's matchups. And we wanted to say, hey, when we look at these matchups, is this line a trick or is it a treat? Pretty simple. Again, a little bit of a twist, but we said, let's bring the off the podcast stuff onto the podcast for you guys. So again, not gambling advice, but I'm going to start off here with Washington. Look, on the road against the New York Jets, and they're only getting 3.5 points. Amir, I think this is an absolute steal. Again, on the road, this is a team that honestly at this point looks like they can legitimately win the NFC East and be a contender. I mean, they have the rookie of the year in Jaden Daniels. He could argue that he is the MVP of the league at this moment as well. I like 3.5 for Washington on the road. Amir, your thoughts about the Commanders going into New York?
Honestly, I love that pick. And I remember earlier in the year when Washington played the Giants. The Giants honestly was one miscompletion away from winning that game. But now Washington is way better
Yes,
now.
more
Jalen Daniels is
confidence.
obviously healthy. The offense is rolling. And honestly, I mean, like it's really a bad matchup for the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, at this point of the season, especially. Now, this is a bit of an upset. Of course, you have to have an upset. New England, they're on the road after a big win against the Jets last Sunday. They're going into Tennessee, Amir. There's not many teams worse than Tennessee in the league at this point in time. If the Browns didn't win last week, I'd say maybe Tennessee is then the second worst team. Tennessee right now, whether if it's Mason Rudolph, Will Levis, they have an argument to be the worst team in the NFL today. Of course, Carolina's in that argument as well. But New England, I think this is a team that, hey, they answered the call of their head coach this past weekend. They got a big win, even though they probably shouldn't have. But they're on the road versus Tennessee. Tennessee's just not a great team in general. The Patriots, they're due for another road win. I mean, again, they're 1-3 on the road this season. I like them at plus 3.5. And honestly, I like the Patriots outright. I like the Patriots money line. Again, on the road, I think Ramondre could be in for a big day there in Tennessee. Because again, Christian Gonzalez is going to have Calvin Ridley locked up, and outside of that, who's going to step up in this Tennessee offense? I'm going to take my chances that Tony Pollard or Westbrook and Kinney are not going to single-handedly win this matchup for Tennessee. So we got a little bit of an upset there. Now, one matchup that me and you are both giving plays for is this Dallas on the road versus Atlanta matchup. To me, I just like Atlanta on the spread. Minus 2.5. I think they win by at least 3, of course. But Dallas, there's just so many questions and not enough answers at this point in time. Atlanta, they need another statement win, is a great way to put it. Last week they could have had it, but Tampa Bay was a little bit banged up. This week, I think you can get a big statement win at home versus Dallas, a team that desperately needs a win. Could be a high scoring shootout, but I'm going to take Atlanta minus 2.5. So just to recap, Washington, of course, minus 3.5. Patriots as an upset. Again, I like their spread, but also straight up on the money line. And Atlanta minus 2.5 at home versus the Cowboys. Amir, let's get into your first pick here, of course.
So for my first pick, I have Atlanta versus Dallas covering the number for 52 total points. And, this seems like a big number, but Atlanta's defense is not very good this year. They give up a lot of explosive plays, a lot of points. Dallas the same as well. Dallas struggles on the ground. Bijan has been playing well recently. Kirk Cousins has been cooking, these past 4 to 5 weeks. And Atlanta's last 4 games, they've covered this number the last 3 out of 4 games. And so this right here is honestly in a really good spot for a shootout, high scoring game. My next pick, I have Minnesota to cover the minus 5 spread, and Minnesota is playing against a team in the Colts whose defense has been kind of shaky. The run defense has been very iffy for them, and Minnesota's 4 out of their 5 wins this year, they've cleared this line, and for the Colts, we know for a fact this game is going to be a heavy run game. For the Vikings, they're going to pound the rock, run the ball, screen game with Aaron Jones, and absolutely win this game outright, in my opinion.
Yes.
And so for my third pick, I have A.J. Brown over 74.5 receiving yards. He's covered this line every single year or every single game this year. He's going against a struggling Jacksonville defense who gives them way too many deep balls, way too many plays. And I want to say Jacksonville is like third in the league for most pass yards given up per game. So expect a big game from Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown.
You think Minnesota? I mean, again, they're going to come into this game a little bit pissed off, right? Two
Yeah.
back-to-back games where they should have won, but unfortunate. Well, some things didn't go their way at the end of the Green Bay game, and of course, last week on Thursday night against the Rams. But they're well rested. Do you think that again, going to Indianapolis to play Joe Flacco and company, who they've looked better with Joe Flacco? Do you think they can cover that spread with Joe Flacco running the crew or running the offense?
I'll say this. The only way Indy's going to keep this game close is if Flacco just throws the ball
Yeah,
like a bunch of times, like 30 to 40 times. And, I love Flacco, but his biggest, weakness these past 2 years, the past couple of years has been turning the ball over. And this Minnesota defense is great at getting interceptions, forcing fumbles, turning the ball over. And so I think Minnesota handles business here. I want to say Indy's going to keep it close at first, but eventually I think the Vikings cover this number.
Yeah, Minnesota desperately needs another win just to get back on track, right? They're in a good spot as far as their playoff lives, but as of right now, you need to get back in that win column when it comes to competing here in the NFC, especially the NFC North, right? Very tough division that they are in. But let's get into our power rankings on the week. Of course, week 9 at the midseason mark. This is going to be an interesting week. Let's start off with my list here. And the number, I have a 10A, 10B situation. At 10A, I have the Atlanta Falcons. At 10B, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. Have they looked amazing in the Eagles? Yes. But on a week-to-week basis, what version of this team are we going to get? I know at least I'm a little bit more confident in the version and the team that we're going to get on a weekly basis for the Atlanta Falcons over the Philadelphia Eagles. But again, after a week like this, some big games for both teams, that can definitely be changed. But as of right now, I'm going to go Atlanta over the Philadelphia Eagles in a 10A, 10B situation. But despite a win, they drop a couple spots because they just didn't look great. A team that did look great is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson continues to improve, and this offense continues to ascend. Last week, they they had like what 3 or 4 touchdowns called back because of penalties. George Pickens definitely should have had a monster day, but Pittsburgh, #1 defense in the league. The offense is now turning the corner with Russell Wilson at the helm. It looks like they're only going to get better. Of course, much needed bye week for them as well. 6, 7, and 8 are teams that we like what we see, but of course, whether if it's just unfortunate losses or injuries the last couple of weeks, they move down the rankings. Of course, I'm mentioning Houston. Some unfortunate injuries. Nico Collins is still down. Of course, Stephon Diggs is now out for the year. Big game tonight against the Jets. Can they pick up a win despite being, I guess, down a couple men? We'll have to wait and see. For Minnesota, you lost a couple games you shouldn't have lost, really, but I still believe in Kevin O'Connell and the crew. Washington, I mean, Amir, walk off Hail Mary last week. Of course, Tyreek Stevenson, we'll talk about him in a moment. But again, crazy performance in game just from start to finish. At 4 and 5, we have the Buffalo Bills and Green Bay Packers, two teams that are now getting back on track after having a couple down weeks there in like the 4 to 6 week range. But Buffalo, I really believe in this team. Of course, is there some questions? Yes, there's always questions, especially when you compare them to the top echelon of teams. But they have the superstar quarterback to take them over the top, and they have the defense, at least the front seven, that is playing pretty good at the moment. Number 5, Jordan Love. I don't want to. I'm one of the biggest Jordan Love fans, but I don't want to get too overzealous and have him way too high. Now, it might be a shocker, but 1 and 2 stay the same. Of course, we know that's the case. And number 3 is Baltimore. They lost a game they shouldn't have to the Browns. It's a divisional game on the road. It's going to happen. And that's kind of my rationale here. I'm not going to let one loss, which is a game that, hey, they had some big plays that just didn't manifest, right? Whether if the receivers dropped the ball or some penalties or whatever the case was, I still believe in this Baltimore team. Do I think they could beat Kansas City for the AFC? No. But I don't think anybody is in that conversation at the moment. Regardless, Baltimore, this is a big week. They just got Deontay Johnson. I want to see how they play against a tough Denver defense. We were talking about it before the pod, and we have a very similar top 10, a couple spot difference with a couple teams. Amir, your overall thoughts on my top 10? Of course, what would you change? Who would you have higher, lower? Who would you have on the list, off the list? I know you're pretty high on Philadelphia.
Yep. So for me personally, I say honestly, I really agree with yours overall. The one thing I would do, which this might be surprising to you, because you're more of a fan of this guy than I am, but I'd move the Green Bay Packers up to 3.
Wow.
And Jordan Love has been playing on the MVP level. It's not talked about enough. I mean, this guy has thrown 2+ passing TDs every single game this year
Also, it
so
seems like
far.
2+ picks every single game, but
And
continue.
right, but yeah, but also, Matt LaFleur has done a great job bringing this team along. Even when J Love goes down, Malik Willis had literally came in, stepped in, played great. And so I'd move Green Bay to 3. I'd move Baltimore down one spot, but I would say I'll show them some grace as well, just like you. It's a divisional game in Cleveland. It's always going to be tough playing a divisional opponent. Um, twice a year and stuff
right.
like that. So I'll show them some grace. The one team I'm going to move down though, or actually, I'll probably leave Houston at the same spot. I move Buffalo up to that 5th spot.
Yeah.
People might freak out and say Houston, demolished Buffalo, but at the same time, Buffalo had some injuries that game. Kind of a asterisk on that game as well. But right now, Houston is honestly hurt offensively. And,
Yes.
me and you before the pod were talking about this. Going to this game, against the Jets, everybody's saying Houston should win, but it's like, I mean, CJ Stroud got nobody to throw to. I mean, he has Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz, but other than that, I mean, this offense hasn't been as high power, as we thought it was going to be this year. It's been Joe Mixon and get out the way basically.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, Houston's honestly in a spot where it's like this is a must win because now Diggs is out and you're basically stalling time for Nico Collins to get back. And so after that, honestly, agree with your list. One thing I'd do is I'd honestly move Philly inside of my top 10,
Yeah.
anywhere from like 7 to like 10. Um, Philly, I kind of feel like I'm sort of holding a spot for them in this top 10, even though I shouldn't, because they've showed, some really good flashes, just like we went against Green Bay, and then some really, really down moments where they completely just blow a lead versus, the Falcons. And so, but these past 2 weeks, this team has been amazing.
Yeah.
Honestly, past 3 weeks, the offense looks great. The defense looks better. Saquon is playing absolutely amazing. Jalen Hurts is playing better, even though he keeps turning the ball over, which has to stop. But A.J. Brown being healthy also has helped this offense,
Yes.
propel forward even more. The defense is still concerning, but I think Philly's now going to go on a run. And I would say for Pittsburgh also, this bye week is much needed because after this, they got the Commanders, the Chiefs, and they got like 6 straight divisional games.
This is what we were talking about before the season. Pittsburgh has a gauntlet of a schedule coming out of the bye week, so they did exactly what they needed to do going into the bye week. Have a very good record. Of course, win the games you're supposed to win, and of course, let the defense carry you. But very tough schedule ahead for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who currently are number 1 in the AFC North. Amir, is it crazy to say that I want to put Detroit over Kansas City, but I haven't been able to because of the undefeated factor and the fact that Kansas City hasn't lost since they lost to Jordan Love last year?
Honestly, it's not really crazy to think that, but it's like, for me, when I look at Kansas City, and I'm be honest with like the people that are saying Detroit's the clear number 1, they just
I'm
hate
not saying
Mahomes.
clear number 1.
Right?
Let me
Yeah,
clarify.
but like when you go on Instagram or social media and you see fans, mad about KC being ranked number 1, they just hate Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs because I clearly remember last year when the playoffs came, and Kansas City was, I want to say in 3 out of those 4 playoff games, they were literally not the favorites. They went ahead and still won. And Casey this year, hasn't been the favorite for a few games and still has won. It's every single week we're like, maybe this will be the week they finally get upset, dethroned, and they continue to still win games. And so for me, I'm going to have the number 1.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say before we move on here is that, hey, Jameis Winston, we got to win here in Cleveland. Who knows? Watch out for us. We might be in the top 10 next week after another win. Of course, we're joking. We are delusional. But let's get into it here, Amir. Of course, last week we had a pretty good week here on the podcast. I was 12-4. You were 11-5. We agreed or disagreed on that Thursday night game where, of course, the Rams, I was behind that train. I mean, I didn't know this, Amir. I didn't know Puka was really going to play that game.
Yeah,
I think we found out after the podcast. But regardless, he ended up having a monstrous day, and the Rams got a much-needed win there against the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit lucky there at the end of the game with a missed face mask call. I don't know how you can miss a call like that. But on the year, I'm at 70%. Amir is at 66%. We're both shooting for either 200 wins or 70% on the year. Now, no, there's not many differences, of course, if any, going into the Week 9 slate of games. As far as Amir and I's opinions, we agree on every single game, but we still want to do our due diligence. Wow, that word kind of beat me up there. And talk about some of these games ahead of the Week 9 slate. Now, we already talked about Dallas, the New England matchup. The Chargers in Cleveland is an upset here, according to the books, and we both have Cleveland at home getting another win against a Chargers offense that honestly looked the best it has last week. Of course, with the emergence of Ladd McConkey and the big game that he had. Amir, the Browns outside of last week, we have looked terrible all season. Why
Yeah.
are you confident in the Browns getting another win at home against the LA Chargers?
Well, for me, the one thing I've learned as a Browns fan is that whoever's playing quarterback feeds off the city's momentum. And seeing
Yes.
last game against Baltimore, seeing the city behind Jameis, I love Jameis. Even though he almost threw like four interceptions, and the Ravens dropped them all. Still Cleveland was rallied behind them, still showed out. And the biggest thing that was impressive for me was the defense. Looked looked like prime Cleveland defense. Just to say last year's defense last week. They kept Lamar in the pocket. Able to sack him, which basically every team this year hasn't been able to do. And so for Cleveland, I think we can win this game. I think we can, adjust to the Chargers play style, which is slow tempo. The one thing I would say I'm kind of concerned is that Herbert in this past game has started to kind of get going.
Yes.
Way more. I say kind of beginning of the year, the Chargers sort of was, we're kind of feeding JK, slow tempo, but it's like now it's like, this offense is a lot more balanced, which kind of concerns me, for our defense. But I think with Jameis, with this offense, with the whole city behind them, we can pull this off.
Yeah, I think we match up extremely well against them. Again, we guard tight ends extremely well. Of course, last week you can't tell because, well, we've never been able to stop Mark Andrews. But Will Dissly has been really playing really good for the LA Chargers offense. And we have the linebackers and again the matchups to really minimize what he would do this upcoming weekend. But also, like for Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer in this receiving room, Quentin Johnston, we have the cornerbacks to match up with them, and we have the front seven to stop what they want to do, which is run the football. It all depends on Jameis Winston, but that was a perfectly said statement. Our quarterbacks feed off the momentum of the city. I mean, hey, that's a beautifully put statement because usually we're negative about our quarterback situation, and most times our
Yeah.
quarterbacks are terrible. New England or New Orleans at Carolina, Amir, I'm not going to say this for you, but to me, I think as of right now, Derek Carr is going to be back. If
Okay.
not, it's a little bit of a question this
Yeah.
upcoming weekend, but honestly, this just feels like a game where Carolina should win with Bryce Young back as the starting quarterback, who, by the way, looked really good last week.
He looked really good.
At the end of that game, made some confident throws and some confident plays. So good to see from the young quarterback to maybe get back on the right track. But I'm going to take New Orleans on the road regardless. Now Thursday night, big game here. Of course, happy Halloween. Houston on the road versus the Jets. Houston's down their top two wide receivers. They are banged up overall, but this is a team that is 6-2. On the inverse, the Jets are 2-6 and they're home here, and the Jets are favored in this matchup. Now, that's again, the Jets, they just picked up Devontae Adams. They're 0-2 with them, but now it is a new look offense. This team is desperate for a win at home, and they have a great defense against the banged up offense. But the Texans also have, of course, Joe Mixon still in the mix. They still have a top five level quarterback, top five offensive coordinator, and Bobby Slowick to, I guess, call the right game. Great defense as well for Houston. Honestly, the closer that we get to game time, Amir, I think I might go with the Houston Texans as underdogs in this matchup. But your thoughts on this Thursday night affair?
So for me, I had Houston at first, but I really thought about it and how this Jets defense honestly matches up perfectly against this Houston's offense. And I mean this Houston's offense has been kind of really reliant on Joe Mixon, and you kind of saw after that week one, when Mixon had like 150, once he went down, he was hurt for a few weeks. This Houston offense kind of looked dead at times through that stretch, and I think now it's like. Now I mean, Diggs is out, Collins is out. The Jets, have an amazing secondary, and so I think for them, they're going to keep on stopping Mixon, slowing it down, and I think they can really, win this game. And but I would say the game for me that I honestly might switch is that second game, on that board. Watching Bryce Young last week in the opening drive, and towards the end of the game, surprisingly, I sat and watched the full Broncos versus Panthers game, which I've watched a full
Good for
Broncos
you.
game in a long time, and so seeing Bryce Young play more confident, play consistent, and it's like now he's matching up against a Carolina defense, not Carolina defense, but a Saints defense who struggled recently.
Yes.
These past 4 to 5 weeks, and so I think it's a perfect spot for him to finally prove himself. But I'm going to kind of wait to see what Derek Carr does.
Absolutely. The late game, of course, the 4 o'clock window, and of course, as we move into the primetime games to end out week number 9, we agree on all these games as well. Baltimore at home to get a much needed win against a very tough defense in the Denver Broncos. Maybe the defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain. And of course, Sean Payton was, again, he's very confident heading into this matchup. The Bears and the Arizona Cardinals, this is going to be a shootout. And I'm excited just to see the quarterbacks and Caleb Williams on one hand, and of course, Kyler Murray on the other. I think it's going to be a shootout there in the desert. Jacksonville and Philly, of course, there's a little bit of a storyline in history here with Doug Peterson. He won the recent Super Bowl there for the Eagles back in 2017. It could be 2018. Regardless, he, of course, has a history with the Philadelphia Eagles, so it's always fun to see these two teams match up. But Jacksonville, they just lost Christian Kirk for the remainder of the year. They just lost Brian Thomas for probably the next month of the season. Amir, this Jacksonville team, they were in a situation where it seemed like it couldn't get any worse, but it has. ETN is still banged up. He might not even play in this matchup this upcoming week. They've had offensive line injuries. Trevor Lawrence, again, he hasn't played great, but he's doing the most with what he has, is what I'm going to come into the defense of him. But interesting matchup there. Philly should win big. The Rams on the road versus Seattle. Amir, Seattle's one of the hardest places to play. Why do you have the Rams here getting another win here in the 12th man or against the 12th man?
This game is kind of similar to I'll say kind of similar to the Dallas versus Falcons game. And from the sense that, this Seattle defense is a team where it's like, before the year, when you look on paper, this defense was projected to be like a top 5 defense. And this defense has struggled, at major points this season. And so I think looking at the Rams last week, seeing Puka come back and play out of his mind, seeing Kyle Williams is still great, seeing that Cooper Kupp, is still really good, seeing that Stafford is healthy. And so I think first Sean McVay, that major win last week versus Minnesota, a top 5 team that's been killing everybody this whole entire year. I think now they sort of gain some momentum to kind of pick it up.
Yeah. Again, I of course I'm with you here, and again, we actually have a lot of upsets here. They're small upsets, right? But the Rams are technically not favored on the road here at Seattle. So again, another big win there for the Rams to get back on track and make this playoff push, just like they did last year. And again, it just seems to be what the Rams do. They start slow, but they always pick it up after everyone gets healthy. Now, the game of the week potentially. We'll come back to in a moment in the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers. We have Kansas City winning on Monday night, of course. Is Mike Evans going to play? Is he not? And if he does play, is his body going to hold up throughout the remainder of the game? Regardless, Kansas City should improve to 8-0. And Amir, if they do, next week, I think the entire podcast, we're just going to talk about potential games that Kansas City could lose throughout the remainder of the season, because that's right now, of course, they're on a trajectory to be perfect throughout or at the end of the year. Now, Indy is going to Minnesota. Of course, storylines on Indy's side. Richardson is benched. It's not a big panic button if you're Indianapolis. You drafted a quarterback that you knew was going to be a project. And to expect him to just not be a project after you drafted him is mind-boggling to me. And I don't understand why fans don't. It's like they don't understand who they drafted. It is a great way that I'll put it. Because at Florida, I said it, he needed another year to really refine his game. But of course, now we're seeing some of those flaws and some of those things that he's not great at get exposed. But again, he'll be back at some point this season, if not the start of next year for Indianapolis. But for Minnesota, Hawkinson's back, Amir. Exciting times. Great to see Hawkinson coming back from his injury. And I think it's going to be a big game for Jordan Addison. So another player prop for you guys, because he complained on Twitter. So as wide receivers, if you complain, you get the ball the next week, is what I've seemed to notice. So Jordan Addison, big game for him upcoming. Detroit, Green Bay, Amir. On paper, this looks like the game of the year. You have 2 MVP quarterbacks in Jared Goff and Jordan Love at the moment, 2 guys that are in the top 5. You have 2 great offenses, 3 great running backs in this matchup, 2 great offensive lines. Well, Green Bay maybe not great, but they're good. So in general, though, 2 great offenses. The Green Bay defense has played really good this year. Both defenses have their questions. I'll say that. But two great coaches, two great everything in this matchup. Green Bay's at home. Of course, at Lambeau Field, huge home field advantage. Amir, who do you have in this matchup? Of course, it says you have Detroit, but why do you have Detroit on the road, divisional matchup, tough game for both teams?
This is a game where I took days to really think about it, and you know, Detroit is so loaded. It's really hard for
Yes.
me to really bet against them, and also the fact that Jordan Love, you know, hasn't practiced this weekend because he has growing strength from this recent Sunday too. He's banged up with the MCL and his groin as well, and so for me, I mean, this Detroit team is rolling offensively, and it's kind of different than last year where it's like where Green Bay could really just blitz Jared Goff, make him uncomfortable. I'm sure you remember, last Thanksgiving where Green Bay just blitzed Jared Goff the entire game, made him, throw two interceptions. I'm pretty sure, but it's like now it's different. Jared Goff's taking care of the football. He's playing even better. This past game is even better with JMO finally, being better. Even though JMO isn't playing this week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I
But
think this is last week of his suspension.
yeah, but I mean, this Detroit team is just way better than they were last year. Surprisingly, it's hard for me to bet against them.
Yeah, at this point in time, again, there's not many flaws with the Detroit Lions. They're winning and they're winning dominantly. Is a
Yeah.
great way to put it. As much as I love Jordan Love, I know their ceiling and it's not as high as the Detroit Lions, at least in my opinion. Of course, I think if there's any team that can knock off the Chiefs, it is that team up north for us there in Michigan. Of course, in the Detroit Lions. But that is the Week 9 slate. Let's close it off here, of course, with the the fans of teams that suck. All right. The poverty franchise's favorite segment of the show, the race for Travis Hunter or the race for Shador Sanders, Carson Beck, the race for the number one pick, in short, is what I'll say. The Carolina Panthers, after losing another game, jump all the way from six, Amir, to number one. They're one of the two only teams with one loss or one win to this point in the season. Tennessee not too far behind at number two. New England, they're at number three. So interesting. Of course, Tennessee, New England play this weekend. So draft implications are in effect for that one. The Jets, even though, hey, we picked them to win, right now they have the fourth pick in the NFL draft. And Jacksonville, with all their injuries and questions, concerns, they are at number five. Amir, at this point in the season, it could be one of these five teams. It could be a team that's not here on the list, for example, like the Cleveland Browns. Who needs the number one pick the most out of any team in the league? Who do you think needs that? Because as much as we love Travis Hunter, he's not going to be the number one pick. We see
Yeah.
this every year. It's going to be a quarterback at the end of the day. And right now, all signs point to it's going to be Shador Sanders. Out of all these teams, who do you think needs it, whether to draft a player or to trade down and get a lot of pieces for the future?
Definitely the Panthers in it. And the Panthers, I mean, on both sides of the ball, just don't have enough, man. And watch them throughout this year. Even when Dalton was in for that first year where he threw for like 350. After that, I mean, that was the only really high moment you saw from this offense. Other than that, I mean, this offense has been struggling. And I think for Dave Canales, me and you both know, he's a QB developer. And so I think, if I'm Carolina's, GM, I'm looking at my head coach, looking at his system, and I'm like, all right, he needs a blank canvas, a quarterback to start from the ground up from, draft a quarterback, make sure we get this number one pick.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. I was going to say, what if, Carolina finishes the year like 4-13 and Bryce Young looks really good in that stretch or at least above average? Would you decide, hey, let's trade down to like three and then get somebody at that point like a Travis Hunter, an extra draft capital, or would you just rather draft a quarterback? But you answered that question. Of course, a lot of this stuff should change. And as a Browns fan, look, if we're gonna suck, let's suck. Let's go out there and get Shador Sanders or one of these top end quarterbacks. Anybody but Jalen Milroe at this point in time. That's just me. I'm a Gators fan, right? I mean, that's just going to be my opinion. I just don't see what the general media sees in Jalen Milroe. Regardless, last thing I'll say, Amir, before we close out the show, again, for the third time, happy Halloween. If you're going to be outside tonight with your friends and family, be safe. If you are trick or treating tonight, of course, a lot of craziness can happen on a night like this. So just be careful traveling groups. And of course, just always be on the lookout of your surroundings. Amir, any last thoughts before we get out of here? Amir, of course, Any again? Are you going trick or treating tonight?
Nah, man, I got practice tonight.
Right. Oh man. Season's winding down for you. I mean,
Yeah.
how many weeks left you got of this senior season for you?
I mean, we got a bye week this week, then we got 2 more weeks left. So yeah, winding down.
Season's winding down for sure. Got to get that tape in though.
Yeah.
But regardless, next week, I'm still up in the air about what we're gonna do. I'll talk to Amir off the podcast. Could be mid-season grades. Could be, hey, maybe if you guys enjoy the betting segment, maybe we'll bring that back for a week. Regardless, we'll see you guys next week. Go enjoy Halloween.